In a world where even the smallest disagreements can lead to arguments, violence, and even death, two brothers tackle the difficult subjects. This podcast is not just about dissecting topics from two different perspectives. It's also about how to have conversations on difficult topics while avoiding the urge to tear someone's head off and vomit down the bloody stump of their neck.
So we'll do just a short little back and forth couple topics that are popular in the news right now. I thought it'd be interesting to see our short perspectives on. And the way I envision this is basically like a topic, and then you and I both put forth like a short opinion on the whole thing, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, something like that. Don't really feel like you need to respond to what the other person says unless you're really feeling called about something that they said that you want to react to. Otherwise, we'll just go back and forth.
Okay.
To start it off, I had a moment after one of our conversations that I wanted to share with you, because I don't know if you get this feeling, but I sometimes feel like that is there any real value to our conversations that we have, that when it, and we've talked about this before, how the other person's opinion really doesn't seem to change a whole lot. And what had happened was that after you and I had talked, my wife Chris came home, and she and I were talking about the conversation, and it was about on the taxes, and we were talking about the taxing of the wealthy, and I was putting forth the idea that taxation shouldn't be punitive. And it occurred to me after I was saying that, that was Colin's perspective. That was one of the things that he had said. And I don't know if I actually, to you, said, Colin, I like your idea, and this was something that is valuable, that taxation shouldn't be punitive. And there, even if it is adjusted to different incomes, it should never be used as a way to punish somebody for making a lot of money. And so I wanted to at least address the fact that if the conversation doesn't seem like, or if your perspective doesn't seem like it sinks in the conversation, oftentimes the other person leaves with that information working their way into their general ideology and perspective. And I think that's the important part with all this stuff, is that we may not see a result in the moment, but I think that if we do present a good conversation or a good point, a good perspective, that it's natural that point, if that other person is receptive, that they do start to incorporate it into what they feel.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. That's cool to hear. It is. I've noticed a few different times that when I sometimes I'll have a perspective, a point of view, and I'm presenting it, and then I'll listen to, and I'll talk about it with different people for a long time, and then I'll listen to some pundit or like a Thomas Sowell or somebody, an economist, and they're, some old speech that they gave, and they're putting forth that idea, and I think to myself, oh my gosh, that was long before. I mean, obviously he had it first, especially if the speech was a long time ago. And I think to myself, I wonder if I got it from listening to him. I kind of vaguely, I don't remember every YouTube clip that I listened to from some of these people, but yeah, I think you do start to incorporate some of those ideas, whether from somebody famous or from our conversations. It is interesting how that stuff sinks in, even though you don't realize in the moment that it is.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think the takeaway here is that we shouldn't feel like we're wasting our time, even if there's no obvious impact or result to what we're saying, because chances are they're hearing it, and if it's good, they'll incorporate it.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing, I don't know if you've been following it at all, but the cryptocurrency has popped up back in the news again. And I know this is something that we talked about having a conversation on, so I don't want to go too deeply into it. But there is talk. I guess the big one, Bitcoin has dropped to nearly 50% of its value in the last 6-8 months or so. And I don't know if the circles you travel in, if this has happened as well, but I know in some of my circles there was a period of time a year or two back where everyone was saying you got to get cryptocurrency. Everyone should be investing in this stuff. It's the wave of the future. People get into it. And as we often see, when the general public starts to get really excited about an investment and starts to get really passionate about it, that's usually when it's the indicator that it is actually a bubble and that at some point in the future it's going to burst.
Yeah, I would agree. I have some friends that are in it, and I try to very softly caution against it. Well, my philosophy, in general, I don't, even some of these big stocks that were doing so well, and I don't even know what they're doing now, but everybody's saying Tesla for a while, or even Apple or the blue chip stocks, I try to stay away from individual stocks because there's just a lot of risk there. And so whether, I tend to like index funds. I understand some of the arguments against them. But even the broad-based, mutual funds seem a lot less risky. If you have a couple of losers in that basket of stocks that you've bought that go bad, presumably there's going to be some other ones that do well. So I don't like individual stocks. I think cryptocurrency is even more risky because while I think there's a very good chance that ends up being at least some sort of currency in the future for us, we just don't know which one or how it's going to look. In fact, what's so interesting about cryptocurrency is a lot of people that are investing in cryptocurrency, what's so interesting about Bitcoin, is a lot of people that invest in cryptocurrency is they understand that Bitcoin is likely not going to be the currency that comes out of cryptocurrency. It's not going to be the selected one. It's just kind of the first one and the most well known. And they say things about it just takes too much time for each transaction to take place. Only so many can happen at any given time. There's a limited number of them. All these different types of things that make you wonder if it could really work. And some of the other iterations, that are more likely to work, there's just so many right now. And so when you invest in one, it's almost, there's only two hopes. One, that a lot of other people are going to want it, which will drive the value up almost artificially. And then two, that it becomes the selected currency or one of the selected currencies of the cryptocurrencies in the future. And you just have no way of knowing that right now. So it's really, it's a risky investment to make. I just can't believe that people, it seems like the people that did well that were ones that took a chance early and it just kind of blew up for them. But then when do you take, if you're those people, like if I were invested, when do you take your winnings? I just don't know, because I guess if you made some money, maybe you just get out as quickly as possible and give up some future earnings because you just don't know when it's going to come back down. There's really no way to tell.
Yeah, I was listening to a couple people talking on the news, an interviewer talking to an expert on the economy and on cryptocurrency in particular. And the question put forward to the expert was, why are we seeing this big drop in value? And the expert says, we have no idea. It's because it's not tied to a company, and you can't look at the valuation of the company. It's not tied to an economy of a country. We have no idea why the value is dropping. And this is one of the big things. It's a totally new investment vehicle or a payment vehicle, and so there's just so much uncertainty. The other thing one of the other ones that I wanted to address with you, have you been following the January 6th commission, the reports and the presentations going on?
Not too closely. I just feel like it's going to be so political on both sides that it would really take a tremendous amount of work to understand what really happened and what should be done about it. I know some bad things happened that day, and I just don't know how bad it really was. And so, yeah, it's been hard for me. I think on the right, they're just going to be, far too lenient, and on the left, they're going to be far too heavy-handed. So I haven't taken the time to try to figure that one out.
Well, I think that it's, while it can go strictly on party lines where, the left is on one side and the right is on the other, because you have a particular individual that is seen as the linchpin, the head of the whole organization, the mafia boss, if you will, that, of course, is on the right, but he's not universally loved on the right. You can find some people that are on the right that are also willing and interested in seeing justice being done. And I think more important than whether justice is served is that there are some people that look at the events on January 6th and see it as there were a handful of people that kept democracy active on that day, and that if a few people hadn't done what they had done both on that day and before, that we could have actually seen for the first time a non-peaceful transfer of power or the transition from one president to the next. And so there's some people that are worried that we've had sort of like now a playbook put forth of how you can go about and disrupt an election and a transfer of power. And I think that's one of the motivations here is to, I guess, shore up the democracy and ensure that it doesn't happen again. And we'll see if they're actually able to achieve it, because there's a lot of people worried about
you kind of trailed off at the end there. I think it was a bad connection. Can you still hear me, Brian?
Yeah, I got you.
Brian?
Something happened in there, but I think we're back on.
I just missed the last few words, but I think I got the gist of what you said.
Okay.
But what I would say, like even the way you framed it just now, when you said there were a few people because of who it is and how divisive he is, speaking of Donald Trump, there were a few people on the right that ensured that justice was done. Like even that language, like, I don't know, to me, that's, I think, how a lot of the coverage of these events goes, is there's a predisposition to assume that one side is right and one side is wrong, and I don't know, I think that there's a danger there, and I think that's what's so risky with Donald Trump in general. Like, people have always had it out for him because they have, in their mind this idea that he is clearly a racist and a bad person. I had no concerns that there would be a peaceful transfer of power. I really didn't. And when it did happen, I wasn't too surprised by it. He probably, he was trying to egg people on a bit and, saying that the election was stolen for him. I think that, Hillary Clinton said similar things. That lady in Georgia said similar things. To see what was actually done, I mean, we could spend maybe a long time on this. I'm not saying he's completely innocent. I'm not saying that all the people on January 6th are completely innocent, but I just find it hard to get an even-handed treatment of what happened on those days, because when people deal with Donald Trump, they had in their mind from the beginning that he was evil, that he was going to do something that was impeachable. So when anything came up, then they're like, okay, this is it, and they did anything they could to prove that this was the event, which I kind of expected to happen too, but it was never even-handed. I don't feel like the treatment of these particular events are even-handed either. I don't feel like we were that close to, a non-peaceful transfer of power or something else happened. I think Mike Pence did some good things, and he was right to take the stands that he did, but I think it was unlikely that something crazy as what we're talking about it was actually going to happen. I know that may be kind of a controversial take, but that's my feeling on it.
Now, of course, there was. I mean, you're right. I don't want to turn this into the conversation about that right now, because we're trying to keep this very short, and maybe this is something we can have a longer conversation on later on if you want. Of course, there is a moral question, there's an ethical question, but then there's a legal question. And if there's clearly illegal activity, then it's no longer about whether someone is perceived to behave one way or another. It's either legal or it's not. But we don't have to go into that right now. The interest rates, the big jump, 3/4 point jump last week. What was your feeling on that?
I think it's probably the right move. You and I have had a number of conversations about whether we were seeing inflation or whether it was just supply chain issues. And it seems to me that this is a a pretty clear indication that the Fed agrees, all these interest rate hikes, not just this last one, that there's a real problem with inflation. And, it wasn't surprising to me at all. I mean, $6 trillion, and by both presidents. And we kind of put it on the presidents. Congress had a lot to do with it too, but there's plenty of people from both sides of the aisle that were injecting massive amounts of money into the economy. And, there's all sorts of reasons why we could say that they did that. I would say that maybe the lockdowns were a little bit too heavy-handed. We probably could have handled some of those things differently with greater testing and for COVID and everything. But, yeah, you inject that kind of money into the economy, and you're probably going to see inflation. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the national debt. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the housing market. I can't believe the housing market hasn't cooled down more. I think we're seeing signs of it cooling down, but I would have thought, it would just cool. And I got I just bought a house. I got the worst of both worlds. The prices hadn't come down yet, but the interest rates had already gone up. So, we just felt like we needed to do it. It was the time to stop doing vacation rentals for a place to live out here in Oregon. But it's a crazy time. I think it was the right move because we are seeing inflation, and hopefully they'll be able to get it under control quickly.
Yeah. My experience wasn't quite as large financially, quite as dramatic as yours, but I had to buy a new truck last year, and I had the same situation where it was right in the middle of the point where there's no inventory in the new vehicles, and I'd never bought a new vehicle. But because of the lack of inventory in the new vehicles, all the prices in the used vehicles was going through the roof. But I was at a time I had to do it. What I was driving was just limping along, and so you got to bite the bullet and make it happen. There's certain times you can be picky, and there's other times it's a matter of necessity. I do think it was the 3/4% rate or 3/4 point raise was a good one. I wish they had started the raising sooner. I think that it's going to have a more dramatic impact now because they're going to feel the pressure to go and make to try and stabilize things, and they're going to have to be more aggressive with it. I feel like they waited too long to get started on the raising of the interest rates, but I'm not in charge, so it doesn't matter what I think. Go ahead.
Well, it was just interesting that they, for so long, even the Fed themselves were calling it transitory and all this stuff. You're like, geez, this is, and there were some supply chain issues, but man, everything across the board was just getting so high. It was really interesting that they decided, I don't know, it seems like this is your moment, Fed. This is the kind of thing that you talk about and, that you should be on top of, and they just kind of were, let's hope that it goes away. Like, it was really surprising to me that they took so long, they took as long as they did.
Right. Yeah, the last point that I wanted to bring up is it was I guess in some ways confirmation again for you and some of the topics that we've discussed, which is that when we talk about we've talked in the past about the biases on the left and the biases on the right, and that the left is very quick to go in and accuse of being biased and that are unwilling to recognize their own biases. I ran across an article a couple of days ago in Politico, which, it's very politically oriented, and they make a fairly good effort of trying to be center, but they tend to left lean as nearly all media outlets do. But in this particular article, the headline was something to the effect of that when FEMA is prejudiced against people of color, against black people of color. And the article goes on to explain that when there's a disaster, flooding or hurricane, whatever, and then FEMA goes in, and that they have a mandate to go and rebuild, and they go and they have money set aside for these things, and they try and help the local population rebuild, and that these rebuilding practices are biased against people of color, is what the article was saying. And it goes on to explain how, which is that they are tasked to go and give a certain amount of money for each one of these disasters. And the easiest way to get that money distributed is to focus on more expensive housing, because then you get the money distributed more quickly. And the author or the people they're interviewing would say, what we should be doing here is focusing on lower income, and instead of making it, how much money you give out, but how many houses you give out, because what happens, the author of the article said, is that people with less expensive houses, poorer people, are not getting as much support. And so what the author of the article did there was they equated poverty and people of color. And they did it in a very subtle way where you didn't actually hear them saying it. And it's a very common problem that occurs. But when the right does it, we accuse them of being racist. When the right says, that people of color are the ones that are populating the prisons, or the ones that are, crime occurs more commonly in neighborhoods where you have minority populations. Well, what they mean is poor people is really what they're saying, but they're making the equation, or they're equating the poverty and people of color, and we accuse them of being racist. But when they do it on the right, because it's supportive of the people of color, of the people in poverty, we tend to overlook it. So it's an example of some of that bias occurring.
Yeah, there's definitely some bias. I don't know. I'd have to look into those. It's interesting. I think, it's almost as if racism is used to make a point. Like, if somebody's doing something, then you can argue against them by saying that they're racist if you can somehow tie race into it, however loosely. And then to make a point, to say, hey, this is why they're doing this, they're racist, or this is racist, or whatever, when really I'd be fine if it is interesting, that whole point that they are trying to get out a certain amount of money, so they focus on the more expensive houses. I mean, I don't care about the racism. That is just crazy to me that they're focusing on the more expensive houses. That's really interesting. I can't believe that. I have more of a problem with the inequality of that than the racism, because the racism may happen, but that seems like a separate issue. Like, let's not focus just on the wealthy people's houses.
Yeah.
What a crazy government policy,
Yeah, and a similar thing happened when they were giving the COVID money to the businesses, where it was easier for the banks to give the money to larger businesses because they could process less loan applications but give out more money. And so you had a lot of smaller businesses that were suffering in the process.
Yeah, that,
Anyway.
It's so interesting because I think of the $6 trillion. Oh. Yeah, I was going to say, the it's just really amazing to me because, I don't know how much money you got. We got some from COVID relief. We got more money than you probably because we have children. And I think they gave more money to families with children, but it was less than $10,000. I think it was like, $5,000 or $7,000 that we got. It just doesn't seem like life-changing money. And when you think about that amount of money, that it was $6 trillion that was given out. I mean, where did it all go? If people like you and I did not receive that much money, who was getting it? And how was it dispersed and who decided where it went? I think that's a big part of it. Probably a lot of it went to big businesses or something, and hopefully it trickled down to the people, other people that needed it and didn't get too concentrated at the higher levels. But I think that's one of the big problems so often that I see with, government intervention is it tends, for all these unseen or unintended reasons, it tends to go to wealthy people, and people in positions of power, which I think is the risk. We just need to be very careful when money is given out and like you're doing, be kind of aware of it and kind of looking at, well, how do we make sure that it gets to the people that are more in need? Because one thing is for certain, whether it should be given out evenly or progressively or something else, it should not go disproportionately to the people with more money, to the people with the biggest houses and more expensive houses. So, it's interesting how some stuff oftentimes works out.
Yeah. What's also interesting is that when you were just now referring to the money going perhaps to companies, and you're hoping that it would, quote, trickle down to other people.
Well, I didn't choose.
Huh?
No, I'm just saying, I know it didn't come to us. I know it didn't. So, like, I didn't choose that policy. You know, Joe Biden and Donald Trump did. Like, I'm not saying, I wasn't proposing that we do that, but how else, like, I didn't see it get there. So are we just hoping that somehow it did? Like, maybe people, kept their jobs for longer or kept getting paid more, even though they were working less? I don't know. I don't support that policy. I don't know how else to say it. You know what I mean? Because it's not a policy that I'm saying, hey, you should do that and then hope it trickles down. I don't think that it will. I'm just saying, well, maybe it did because that's what we did. I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Just giving you a hard time about your trickle-down economics.
Yeah, that's fair.
Anything else from the last couple of weeks that you would want to just have a quick little back and forth on?
No, I mean, you've got Ukraine, but I don't feel like that's another one. So many of these stories, Ukraine is a good example that I have no idea what's happening. The reason I say that is I'll read some story and I don't even know which side it's on, but it feels like both people on the right and the left are saying, well, we shouldn't be supporting Ukraine and we should, I don't know. Or, Ukraine is fighting back and they're having some success, but, like one story you read, they're having great success. The other story is no, they're just getting blown out and those, success stories are inflated or, are falsified or something. It's one of those news stories just like January 6th that I just sit back and scratch my head and say, I don't really know what happened. It's just too confusing to me. And there's too many, different viewpoints out there. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Well, the one thing that I'm very aware of with everything going on in the Ukraine is that they've talked about how this might impact other countries, and a great example that's often referred to is China and Taiwan, and China's been fairly aggressive in a lot of their behaviors and how they've been working their way into the economies of Africa, in Sri Lanka and some other places. And of course, China has always claimed ownership or sovereignty over Taiwan. And so some people have said if we were very soft and not very responsive to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it might have given China the impression that we wouldn't have a reaction if they were to do something with Taiwan. And so if nothing else, even if we put aside whether, ignoring the Russia-Ukraine, who's right, who's wrong, where we should be supporting, whether we should or shouldn't, that there could be some sort of consequence to invasion of another country for China and some other countries. There is some value there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's interesting is, you and I have talked before about Donald Trump, who was the first president in like 50 years that didn't get involved in sending our military to some foreign country. I mean, everybody else had done it. Joe Biden, I wonder what he would have done if the economy and if if the economy was in a different place, if COVID hadn't happened, but he hasn't invaded anybody yet either. So, it's interesting that these are the first two guys and all this, like, kudos to the both of them that we haven't, been so quick to get involved. I mean, there is the other side of it. Yeah. Like what will happen with China and Taiwan, but I don't know. That would be an interesting topic for another day too. How much should we get involved? How much should we say, well, if there's other countries that are invading each other, and we don't have, a treaty with them because, we did some things for people in Iraq and in Kuwait and people, those presidents took a bit of a beating for what they did there. Even though people were suffering there, that, Saddam Hussein was not a democratically elected leader and he was killing, people in government. Like, where do we draw the line and decide, it's another part of the world. We can't be the police force of the world and and send our young men over there to die and to fight to protect these other people. But when do we decide, well, it's World War II and we have to? I don't know. It's a really interesting topic.
Well, and it's also helpful to remember that military and defense spending, it's expensive. And if you don't have to spend your money on the military and defense because the world is relatively safe, well, what other things could you do with that money? Could you go, lift up your own economy? Could you do some more, whether you want to spend more money on humanitarian effort or you want to spend some more money on your local economy? Either way, if you don't have to worry about defending yourself from an aggressor or defending some other nation from an aggressor, because we live in an era of general peace, we can do better things with the money. I mean, just a jet is like $50 million or something. What would you do?
Well, how do we? Are you suggesting that we then we invade other countries to keep the peace, or are you suggesting we don't invade and say? I don't know. I'm not sure which one you're saying.
I'm not putting forth either one really. What I'm saying is that since World War II, the Western world has been relatively peaceful. There's been the Balkan War that went on for a little bit, but outside of that, there hasn't been a whole lot in Europe or in North America. And as a consequence, we've had a fairly upwardly mobile economy and populace, and it's been good. And if the world were to start to devolve into a more of a wartime footing, we would lose a lot of that advantage, and we'd have to start to then shift a lot of our spending into wartime activities. And everybody benefits when there's no war, not just the people that are fighting it, not just the people that are dying in it, but everyone else that is now able to spend their money on other things.
Yeah, I would agree. I just, I fear that military-industrial complex and all the things that they say we need to do to keep the peace. I mean, there's like 50,000 troops in Germany right now. In Germany. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you talk with some, the Joint Chiefs of Staff or some general, he would tell you, well, we need them there because that keeps peace in Europe and protects against Russia or whatever, But man, we have so many people in so many places and so many jets in so many places. They're going to keep, it would be interesting, like a guy like me who's a bit of we should not get involved in militarily in different parts of the world, to then sit down, if I became president, which would never happen obviously, but with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they're telling me like, oh my gosh, we need to go to Iraq, we need to go to, Ukraine. And if I would have the strength to be able to stand up to them and say, no, we don't. Or if they convince me and say, listen, Colin, you don't understand it. You're naive. These politicians these libertarians that tell you that we don't need to, be out there in the world. We do. We need all these bases in all different parts of the world. I don't know. It's an interesting idea because, that 50,000 troops in Germany, we've got them. That's just one small example of a place that's in a pretty good place. It's a pretty good state, Germany. It's pretty safe. And they have they're able to protect themselves, and they're doing just fine, and they handle themselves really well in the world. But we've got 50,000 troops there. Just a small inkling of what we have in all these different countries and all the money that we're throwing around there to keep ourselves safe. And you wonder how much of it is really necessary and how much of it is just people saying, this is how I keep my job or I get power, is I tell them how important me and the military are. We need more and more of us, otherwise we're going to get overrun by the Nazis or the communists. Once the Cold War stopped, you'd think we would have dialed it back, but we're just continuing to go, and we've invaded so many different countries at different times. It's really, Iraq is one example, but we did it in Libya. We've done it so many different times, and I'm sure there's arguments that justify our invasions of those places. There certainly are, and I've heard them. But man, we are spending a tremendous amount of money to keep ourselves safe, and you wonder how much of it is really necessary.
Yeah, expecting a general to be fair-minded and to offer arguments from both perspectives is like asking a Bitcoin investor to tell you the pros and cons without letting their own biases come into the conversation. It's not going to happen. You're invested one way, and so you're going to try and push the conversation one way. Yeah. I think you're right. I think it would be an interesting conversation to discuss the U.S. in terms of the world. U.S. is part of the world. U.S. policeman of the world, and all that, but not something right now.
Okay.
Awesome. If you don't have anything else, I'm good with this conversation.
All right, Brian. Sounds good.
Good luck with getting moved in.
Okay.
All right.
I'll talk to you soon, Brian.
We'll do that. Sounds good. Later.
Okay. Bye.
We hope you learned something in this episode of Brother versus Brother, a podcast about difficult conversations. We also hope that you enjoyed it enough to subscribe to the podcast. You can help us by spreading the word. Share this episode on your favorite social media so that others will have an opportunity to experience it as well. You can also support us by donating through Patreon. This information and more can be found on our website, broconvo.com, and on our various social media accounts. Thank you.